Let's start with the core of this, because if you understand this one piece, so much else suddenly makes sense. For someone with strong narcissistic traits, accountability doesn't land as information. It doesn't land as feedback. It doesn't even land as a request for repair. It lands as an attack. And that distinction is everything. When you say something as simple as, "that hurt me," you're not offering a criticism, you're sharing an experience. But to a narcissistic personality, that statement immediately triggers threat. It threatens their self-concept, the carefully constructed story they tell themselves about who they are: competent, blameless, superior, or at the very least, never wrong. Accountability pokes a hole in that story, and the reaction you see is about survival, not reflection. This is why the response often feels so disproportionate. You bring up a small issue, and suddenly there's anger, deflection, sarcasm, or icy withdrawal. You might even find yourself thinking, "I didn't accuse them of anything. Why are they reacting like this?" It's because the mere implication that they may have caused harm feels intolerable. Shame is lurking just beneath the surface, and accountability risks exposing it. And here's the important part. This reaction is not about you. It's not about how gently you phrased it, how calm your tone was, or how valid your concern is. You could deliver your words perfectly, and the response would still be the same. That's because the issue isn't the message. It's what the message represents. Responsibility feels like humiliation. Reflection feels like weakness, and vulnerability feels dangerous. So instead of engaging, they defend. They interrupt. They minimize. They twist the conversation until the spotlight shifts away from their behavior and onto yours. Suddenly, you're explaining your tone, your timing, your intentions. The original issue disappears, and you're left trying to prove that you're not attacking them while they've avoided accountability entirely. Over time, this pattern trains you. You learn to soften everything. You preface your feelings with disclaimers. You say things like, "I might be wrong," or "it's probably just me," or "I don't want to start a fight." You shrink your truth to make it more palatable, hoping that if you're careful enough this time they'll hear you. But they don't, because the problem was never how you said it. What's actually happening is that accountability threatens the narcissist's internal equilibrium. It disrupts the fantasy of being faultless or victimized or misunderstood by everyone else. So they react as though they're under attack, even when no attack exists. And once you see this, you can stop personalizing their response. You can stop believing that if you just explain better, they'll suddenly take responsibility. This is the moment where clarity begins to replace confusion. You realize that their defensiveness isn't proof you did something wrong. It's proof you touched the truth. And once you understand that accountability feels like an attack to them, you stop trying to deliver it like a peace offering and start protecting your own reality instead. Because the moment you stop mistaking their defensiveness for your failure, you take your power back. Once accountability feels like an attack, the next move is almost automatic. Blame shifting. This is the narcissist's go-to defense, and it happens so fast that by the time you realize it, the conversation has already been hijacked. You start out talking about something they did, something concrete, something that hurt you or crossed a line, and within minutes, sometimes seconds, you're the one on trial. You might notice how subtly it begins. They don't deny the event outright at first. Instead, they question your perception. "You're too sensitive. You took it the wrong way." "That's not what I meant." The focus quietly slides away from their behavior and onto your reaction. Now, the issue isn't what happened, it's how you felt about it. And feelings, in their world, are always negotiable. If that doesn't work, the blame escalates. Suddenly it's about your tone, your timing, your past mistakes. "Why are you bringing this up now? You always do this. After everything I've done for you, this is what you focus on." The original concern is buried under a pile of side arguments, emotional guilt, and character attacks. And because you're likely someone who values fairness and resolution, you take the bait. You try to clarify. You defend yourself. You explain. That's exactly the trap. Blame shifting works because it forces you into a defensive position. The moment you start explaining yourself, the narcissist has achieved their goal. They no longer have to look at their own behavior. They've redirected the discomfort outward. And what's especially destabilizing is how convincing it can feel. You might walk away thinking, maybe I did overreact, or maybe I could have said it better, even when your original point was entirely valid. Over time, this pattern creates deep confusion. You start entering conversations already braced for impact. You rehearse your words, you anticipate their reactions. You might even avoid bringing things up altogether because every attempt ends the same way, with you feeling drained, doubting yourself, and somehow responsible for a problem you didn't create. Meanwhile, they walk away untouched, unburdened, and unaccountable. What makes blame shifting so powerful is that it's not just about avoiding responsibility, it's about maintaining dominance. If they can keep you focused on fixing yourself, apologizing, or calming them down, they stay in control. The relationship becomes asymmetrical, one person constantly self-examining, the other never looking inward at all. And here's the part that's hard to accept but incredibly freeing. Once you do, there is no perfect explanation that will stop this cycle. You can be calm, logical, compassionate, and precise, and blame shifting will still happen. Because it's not a misunderstanding, it's a strategy. Consciously or not, it protects their ego and preserves their sense of superiority. The shift begins when you recognize blame shifting for what it is and stop participating in it. You don't chase the moving target, you don't defend every accusation. You don't abandon the original issue just to keep the peace. You notice the deflection, name it internally, and decide what you will and won't engage with, because the moment you stop carrying blame that was never yours, the game loses its power. After the defensiveness and the blame shifting, there's often another moment that gives people hope, the apology. And I want to be very careful here because this is where so many well-intentioned, emotionally attuned people get pulled right back in. The apology shows up and it sounds Ike progress. It feels like maybe finally something landed. But with narcissistic dynamics, apologies are rarely about accountability. They're about strategy. Listen closely to the words. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry, but you have to understand what you did first. I apologize if that came across wrong. These statements are designed to tone the conversation, not to repair the damage. There's no clear ownership of behavior, there's no naming of harm, and most importantly, there's no curiosity about your experience. The discomfort they feel isn't about what they did to you. It's about the risk of losing control, access, or admiration. In healthy relationships, an apology opens the door to change. It's followed by reflection, by questions, by different behavior over time. In narcissistic relationships, the apology is often a reset button. It's a way to make everything go quiet again so the status quo can resume. And because you may have spent so much time being dismissed or blamed, even a weak apology can feel like relief. You think, at least they said sorry, and you minimize the rest. But notice what happens next. The pattern doesn't change. The same behaviors repeat. And if you bring them up again, the apology itself may be weaponized against you. I already apologized, why are you still bringing this up? Now the apology becomes proof that you are the problem, unforgiving, dramatic, or stuck in the past. What was supposed to heal suddenly silences you. This is where confusion deepens. You start questioning your expectations. You wonder if you're asking for too much. You tell yourself that nobody's perfect, that relationships require compromise, that at least they're trying. But trying doesn't mean saying the right words once. Trying means sustained accountability, and that's the part that's missing. A genuine apology requires humility, and humility is profoundly threatening to narcissistic defenses. It means tolerating shame without deflecting it, sitting with another person's pain without minimizing it, and allowing your self-image to shift. That's not just uncomfortable. It feels dangerous to someone whose identity depends on never being wrong. So instead, the apology becomes performative. It's delivered with just enough sincerity to keep you engaged, just enough remorse to pull you back into hope. And hope is powerful. It keeps you invested, patient, and waiting for the version of them that shows up in words but never quite arrives in actions. The turning point comes when you stop evaluating apologies by how they sound and start evaluating them by what follows. Does behavior change? Is responsibility sustained without resentment? Is there space for your feelings without punishment? If the answer is no, then the apology isn't a bridge, it's a distraction. Because real accountability doesn't need to convince you, it shows up consistently. When accountability is absent and blame is constantly redirected, something quiet you too deeply damaging begins to happen inside the other person. It's not just frustration or disappointment anymore, it's confusion. And that confusion doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, through repeated conversations that go nowhere, through moments where your reality is questioned just enough for you to start questioning it yourself. You may notice that after every interaction, you walk away feeling unsettled. You know something didn't feel right, but you can't quite put your finger on it. You replay the conversation in your head, wondering if you said it wrong, if you misunderstood, if you somehow caused the entire thing. This is how chronic lack of accountability erodes clarity. The issue is never resolved, so it lives on inside you. Over time, you begin doing emotional gymnastics just to maintain equilibrium. You over-explain your feelings. You provide evidence for why you're hurt. You justify your reactions. You try to be more patient, more understanding, more reasonable. And with each attempt, the goalposts move. What was once a simple boundary now requires a full presentation, and even that isn't enough. This dynamic quietly trains you to take on responsibility that isn't yours. You apologize just to end the tension. You accept partial blame to keep the peace. You internalize their version of events because it feels easier than continuing the cycle. And slowly, without realizing it, you start trusting their narrative more than your own experience. The danger here. When accountability is consistently avoided, reality becomes negotiable. Facts are debated, intentions are weaponized, your emotions are treated as inconveniences rather than signals, and the more this happens, the more disconnected you become from your own intuition. You stop asking, "Is this okay?" and start asking, "How do I make this stop?" This confusion isn't accidental. It serves a purpose. When you're uncertain, you're easier to manage. You hesitate before speaking up. You doubt your instincts. You look to them for cues about what's reasonable, what's acceptable, what's true. The power imbalance grows, not because they're always loud or aggressive, but because your inner compass has been destabilized. And here's the painful irony. You may be the one doing the most emotional work in the relationship, yet you feel like you're the problem. You're reflecting, adjusting, empathizing, while the other person remains unchanged. That imbalance can leave you feeling exhausted, unseen, and strangely lonely even when you're not alone. The turning point comes when you recognize that confusion itself is information. Healthy relationships bring clarity, even during conflict. They don't require you to abandon your perception to maintain connection. When accountability is present, issues may be uncomfortable, but they resolve. When it's absent, they linger and multiply. So if you find yourself constantly explaining, doubting, or shrinking just to keep things steady, pause. That fog you're in isn't a failure of communication, it's the consequence of sustained unaccountability. And the moment you start trusting your own clarity again, the confusion loses its grip. At the center of all of this, behind the defensiveness, the blame shifting, the hollow apologies, and the confusion, is a missing ingredient that makes real accountability possible: empathy. Not performative empathy, not intellectual understanding. Emotional empathy, the ability to genuinely register that someone else is hurting because of something you did, and to let that matter enough to change you. Accountability requires sitting with discomfort. It means resisting the urge to explain yourself, justify your intentions, or escape the moment. It asks you to tolerate shame without collapsing or retaliating. For someone with narcissistic traits, that internal experience is overwhelming. Their emotional system isn't built to metabolize shame, it's built to avoid it at all costs. Empathy would require them to pause and ask, "What was this like for you?" But that question opens the door to vulnerability. And vulnerability feels dangerous. It threatens the carefully protected self-image they rely on to feel stable. So instead of turning toward your pain, they turn away from it. They minimize it, they rationalize it, or they attack it. This is why conversations about harm often feel so one-sided. You're speaking from emotional experience, They're responding from self-protection. You're asking to be understood. They're trying to survive the moment without losing ground. And when empathy is absent, accountability never fully forms, because there's no internal motivation to repair what they can't emotionally register. It's important to understand that this isn't about intelligence or awareness. Many narcissistic individuals can describe emotions accurately. They can even appear insightful. But understanding emotions is not the same as feeling them in relation to others. Without emotional empathy, another person's pain remains abstract, interesting, inconvenient, or irritating, but compelling enough to change behavior. So instead of accountability, you get explanations. Instead of repair, you get defensiveness. Instead of growth, you get repetition. And you may find yourself trying to teach empathy, explaining how their actions affected you, hoping that if you say it clearly enough, something will click. But empathy isn't learned through explanation. It's either accessible in that moment or it's not. This realization can be deeply painful, especially for people who lead with compassion. You assume that if someone knows they hurt you, they'll care. You assume remorse leads to change. And when that doesn't happen, you internalize it. You wonder if your pain wasn't serious enough, if you didn't express it well enough, if you're expecting too much. You're not. The absence of empathy explains why accountability never sticks. It's not that they don't hear you. It's that your pain doesn't anchor inside them. There's nothing there to hold it, to transform it into responsibility or restraint. And once you see that, you can stop trying to extract accountability from a place where it can't grow. Because accountability without empathy is just performance, and performance never sustains change. This is where everything begins to shift, not because the narcissist suddenly changes, but because you do. After recognizing the patterns, understanding the blame shifting, seeing through the hollow apologies, and grasping the absence of empathy, something clicks. You stop absorbing responsibility that was never yours, and that single change alters the entire dynamic. At first, it may feel unnatural. You're used to explaining, soothing, repairing, and bending. You're used to being the one who holds the emotional weight of every interaction. So when you stop doing that, when you don't rush in to clarify, defend, or apologize, the silence can feel uncomfortable. But that discomfort is information. It tells you how much of the relationship was being held together by your effort alone. When you no longer carry the blame, the narcissist often reacts strongly. You might see escalation, anger, accusations, guilt-tripping, or sudden attempts to pull you back in with charm or remorse. This isn't because you're doing something wrong. It's because the old system has stopped working. They relied on your self-doubt, your empathy, and your willingness to take responsibility to keep the imbalance intact. What's important here is that you don't confuse escalation with proof that you should re-engage. In fact, escalation is often evidence that your boundary has landed. When you stop arguing your case, when you stop chasing accountability, when you disengage from circular conversations, you remove the fuel. And without fuel, the dynamic can't run the same way. You may notice a profound internal shift as well. Your thoughts become clearer. You start trusting your perceptions again. You no longer spend hours replaying conversations or wondering what you company old have said differently. Instead of asking, how do I fix this? You begin asking, do I want to stay in this? That's not selfish. That's self-respect returning. This doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you become grounded. You stop over-functioning in a relationship that underfunctions. You allow people to experience the consequences of their own behavior without rescuing them from it. And that can feel radical if you've been trained to prioritize harmony over truth. There's also grief here, grief for the version of the relationship you hoped accountability would create, grief for the conversations that never went anywhere, grief for the realization that clarity, not effort, was what you were missing. Allow that grief. It's part of letting go of the fantasy so you can stay rooted in reality. And here's the most empowering part. When you stop carrying their responsibility, you reclaim your energy. You're no longer expending it on proving, persuading, or performing emotional labor that isn't reciprocated. That energy comes back to you in your decisions, your boundaries, your peace. The narcissist may never take accountability, but you no longer need them to in order to move forward. Your clarity becomes your closure. Your self-trust becomes your anchor. Because the moment you stop accepting blame that was never yours is the moment you truly take your life back.